Good evening and welcome to the BS and Beer Show. BS stands for Building Science. Tonight we're talking about the fascinating world of interior finishes. Exterior finishes. Well, we'll talk about interior next time. Exterior finishes. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Emily Mottram, architect here in Maine, and tonight I'm having a petite Shiraz. I don't have any beer, so this is what we've got. BS and Beer is a grassroots movement to share building science knowledge through our local meetup groups and this, our Zoom show. The brew crew and our guests volunteer our time each month to bring you what we hope is a fun and informative discussion. We encourage you to find a local BS and Beer discussion group or start your own group if one doesn't already exist. You can find more information on the bsandbeershow.com and see what groups we are aware of. There could be other groups out there, so let us know if your group isn't listed. Post your questions and comments in the chat box. Be sure to pick all panelists and attendees or everyone. Otherwise, Zoom will only send it to the hosts, so people won't know you're here. In fact, go ahead now and introduce yourself in the chat box, who you are, where you're at, what you're drinking, so your friends know you're in the audience as well. The video recording from tonight's show will be available on Green Building Advisor, and all past shows can also be found on the YouTube channel through a link at the BS and Beer Show. Thank you for our media partners, Green Building Advisor and Fine Homebuilding Magazine, for helping us make this happen every month. Two quick announcements. Travis and Ben, unfortunately, aren't with us here tonight because they're at Build Show Live in Austin. So they're there through Saturday. And if you're in the area, it's not too late to attend. We'll throw the link in the chat box for you. And then on December 4th and 5th, in Atlanta, Nikki Kruger and I are actually offering a training with Build Her Roadshow, and it's going to be a women in construction event centered on building science training for hot and humid climates. There's also going to be some business sessions meant to enhance business acumen and networking and engage personal growth. And I just want to mention that there'll be 9 AIA HSW credits and 9 FIAS credits as well. So for anybody who's looking to get their credits in before the end of the year, that is also going to be available. So we'll throw that in the chat box. And last, if anyone has an event coming up before a show, reach out to us and let us know. But tonight, if you're here and you have an event coming up, feel free to post it in the chat box so everybody knows about it with a link to what you have going on. So Mike, off to you.
Thank you. Mike Maines in Maine. I'm also out of beer, so I'm also drinking a red wine. This is a Bordeaux. I have no idea what brand it is, but it's really tasty. Let me introduce our guests. Justin Fink has over 20 years of experience in home building, restoration, and woodworking. When his first child arrived in 2020, he decided to build a business that would inspire the next generation of craftspeople. Justin has a soft spot for historic New England buildings and uses his knowledge of the Secretary of the Interior standards to complete restorations and renovations. He is committed to constant learning and incorporates modern building practices and environmentally friendly building materials into his work. Justin was also a Fine Homebuilding editor for 18 years, including 4 years as editorial director. And last but not least, he helped me build a mantle and bookshelves at my house for an article, and I can confirm that he actually knows what he's doing. And we will put a couple of links for his pages in the chat. And Patrick McCombe, is an experienced writer, editor, and producer specializing in the home improvement and residential construction sector. His experience as a carpenter, building materials salesperson, and longtime construction media career make him skilled at creating construction content across all media. Patrick hosts the Fine Homebuilding podcasts and produces content for Fine Homebuilding Magazine and FineHomebuilding.com. Patrick has been at Fine Homebuilding for over 20 years, including over 6 years as senior editor. Before that, he was an editor at Hanley Wood for 7 years. And last but not least, while Patrick has not yet helped me build anything, not yet anyway. We have worked together on enough articles and talked enough that I can assure you that not only does he understand the ins and outs of construction, he is a consummate journalist as well. I apologize for my stutter. That comes with the package. And we'll post Patrick's links in the chat box. And I believe you guys do. I should have stopped after Justin. Justin, what are you drinking tonight? What are you doing?
Oh, for me, it's always the Sea Hag,
Sea Hag
local
IPA.
Connecticut beer. I love it. My favorite.
All right. And Patrick, how about you?
I got a Fox and Park root beer, which is in East Haven, Connecticut.
Ooh,
Delicious. Highly recommend it. They have lots of flavors
Good
if you don't like root
choice.
beer.
excellent, excellent. Uh, did we agree that Patrick would start us off with a presentation, and then Justin, was that our?
I think that makes sense to me.
All right, you're up.
All right. So y'all, it's kind of odd for me to honestly be presenting about painting. Because to be honest, I don't even like painting, but I do love chemistry, and painting is a lot about chemistry. And my part of tonight's presentation is going to be how not to mess up your paint job, how to make it as long lasting as possible using some good principles based on sound chemistry. And all this stuff comes from things I've learned doing my job with professional painters, experts who work at paint companies. I visited Dow Chemicals paint farm in Southeast Pennsylvania as a work trip, and this information comes from there. There is a lot more information about these subjects that I'm going to cover tonight and tons of other painting subjects at finehomebuilding.com. And I'm sure we'll put links to the articles that I reference there. And if you want to learn more about painting, especially how to do a good job and do it so it's long lasting, you're going to want to check out that stuff. So without further ado, this is 10 tips for a longer lasting paint job. And number one, and this comes from Rick Watson, who was a retired executive at Sherwin-Williams. He was in their technical department. What you're painting must be clean, dry, and sound. And what does that mean? Well, clean how? Just about anything on the surface of whatever you're painting is likely to prevent good adhesion. And when we're talking about chemistry, we're talking about bonding. If you have some kind of contaminant between the two materials, it's not going to stick as well. It might not stick at all. When you see really bad failures of just peeling paint, it's often because the surface was dirty. And that's when you see things fail quickly. Concrete dust. There are hundreds of other things that could affect adhesion. So what do you do? Well, the simplest thing to do is to wipe stuff down with a little soapy water. And I mean a little soap because you don't want the soap residue to actually compromise the adhesion. So experts and painters have told me Dawn dish soap is the best thing to use. And it's easy to get. So you can take that as gospel. Once you've watched something, or if you don't know how dry it is, and you likely don't unless you've tested it, you're going to do so. You're going to want to use a moisture meter to determine the moisture content. And paints and coatings always in their instructions tell you what the moisture content of the material should be. And IR cameras, if you can't climb up, close to the gutter or the overhang, they can often tell you what surfaces are wet. And if it shows up on an IR camera looking wet, you can be pretty well assured it's not dry enough to paint. Sound. So sound means the surface is in good condition. It's not rotted. It doesn't have peeling paint on it. It isn't sunburned. If you're unfamiliar with that term, some materials, bare wood and wood primed with cheap primer, can be degraded by UV exposure. So what happens is the surface on there gets friable, and when you try and paint over it, you can have paint that won't stick. I bring this up because those pre-primed materials that you get at the lumber yard or at the home center, they're super convenient. I love them myself, but that stuff, the primer is usually the lowest cost, most inexpensive, excuse me, I'm being repetitive, the lowest cost product that'll do the job. And doing the job isn't necessarily doing as good a job as you would want. So keep that in mind. And generally speaking, the surface of primers is not very good at holding up to UV. Exterior primers are better than interior primers, but you don't want to leave them exposed for too long. And once again, you'll find that information, how long you can leave it exposed, in the product data sheet. This is one of the articles I was telling you all about earlier. This is the Dow paint farm I visited, and those are paint samples out there on racks. And you'll see that some of them are angled to the sun, some of them are vertical. In the back of the complex, there are actually paint samples that are hung upside down to simulate soffits or a porch where it's not going to get washed by rain. So I found this stuff fascinating. And if you want to know why a particular paint problem has developed in your life, I would check out this article, and you can look to see what the characteristics are of the various failures and what likely caused it, and even better, how to prevent it in the future. The people who worked there were very interesting. They were driving me around in a golf cart, and when they learned that I was into what they were doing, they were offering to show me any sample that they could think of. Do you want to see tannin staining? Do you want to see our oldest samples? They were great, and I learned a lot from them. And you should take what they do with similar respect, because these companies are trying to make products that work in the real world through the testing that they're doing. If you look at the samples in these little, sample chips shown in the magazine piece, they're blue, you might notice. And that's important, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, so how else can this go wrong? You got to paint in the right conditions. And once again, that information is going to be on the product data sheet. You all can see what you should avoid here, and I won't bore you with reading that. But this is how things go wrong. You all have probably seen in recent years paint products marketed as self-priming, or sometimes they're described as paint and primer in one. And that's probably fine sometimes, but if you need a primer because of a surface condition problem, or you're working with a weird material, you should use it. And there are specialty products made for, damaged surfaces, smelly, smoky surfaces, moldy surfaces, concrete, unusual materials. You can see what I wrote there. But what does it do? How is it different? So why do you need a primer? So paints and primers do different things. And the primer's primary job is to prepare the surface for its top coat. And along with that, it's going to block stains. And different primers are better at blocking different stains, whether they're water-based or oil-based. If you want to learn more about that, you're going to want to check out this article that I did a few years ago. But the point I'm trying to make here is that you should get what works best for your particular situation. And you can see all the different products that are available here. And what's perhaps most interesting about this is that these are only the products I was purchasing from, I think, 3 or 4 different stores. And I didn't buy any that overlap. They're all individual formulations. So there's a lot out there. If you have specific questions, it would be good to talk about later on in our discussion tonight. Here's a good one. Prime all 6 sides. Building scientists will tell you the same thing. You want to make water moving through materials to be somewhat uniform. And a good way to help do that is to prime on all 6 sides. Field cuts are especially important because they're often end grain, and carpenters hate to prime end cuts, myself included. You end up with it the primer all over you and your tools, but it's very important. One little tip here, shellac-based primers, they might be appealing for this work because they work in low temperatures, and anyone who's done carpentry in New England knows that sometimes you're putting up, you know, fascia in January. They don't work. It's not elastic enough. I've had failures of paint films because I tried to prime end cuts with shellac-based primers. What is a shellac-based primer? So bin, sometimes called stain-killing primers. They are thinned with alcohol. They dry very quickly. They're good for some stuff, not for this. All right, mix your paint thoroughly. It's a combination of things in there. It's a suspension. It's not a uniform material. So you want to stir your paint, getting the stuff from the bottom, mix it uniformly. Don't rush. You shouldn't apply paint that was recently shaken. Shaking your paint at the paint store is fine. You're going to actually want them to do that if you're having a color mixed, but you don't want to put it right on the house. The reason is there's little tiny bubbles in there, and they create a foothold for dirt and mildew, which makes the paint film fail prematurely. So avoid that. You can, to a degree, speed up that process by taking the lid off the can or opening the 5-gallon pails screw top, but it's best to just wait and then stir it with a stirrer to just combine the ingredients, but try not to put air in it. I'm guessing Justin, when he talks a little bit later, is going to talk about the value of good paint and brushes. It's something I learned later in life, and suffice to say, it's super important. It's going to make your work better. It makes it more enjoyable to use good tools. I would highly recommend buying good paint also. I've had great success with both Benjamin Moore and Sherwin-Williams products. I wouldn't buy paint from the home center just because I want the expertise of paint staff and tested products. Not that like home center paint couldn't be good. I just have had less success with it. So I stick to mostly Benjamin Moore, mostly because Carol likes the colors better than the Sherwin-Williams products, which is perhaps the most important reason to choose the right paint, because if you don't like looking at it, why even do it? What else? Oh, something else I learned from pro painters, consider wider covers. You know, I've always used 9-inch roller covers, but like 12 and 16-inch covers, 14-inch, I believe, are even out there. Super handy, super, it makes it a lot faster. And it doesn't seem to be much work aside from they're a little heavier. And if you want to learn more about the right way to put paint on in the right order, I would recommend this article from Philip Hansel that I worked on. I don't know, I guess this has been, wow, 10 years now. Amazing. Philip tells you how to paint window sash the right way so you don't end up messing up your own work, which is kind of frustrating. And he has his choices for good equipment for doing brushwork. This is a thing I've heard from paint chemists and painters alike. You know, don't let things get terrible. Repaint the house or do some upkeep before things start peeling. Water intrusion, leaky gutters are very problematic because they allow bulk water to get behind painted boards, and the inevitable result is paint failure. Here's a little interesting aside related to water moving through assemblies will blow off paint. You all might know, one of you in the audience tonight might know better than the story than I do, but Joe Steebrook, as I understand, or as he tells it, you know, came to fame with paint failures. And the problem was they were putting cellulose insulation in these older structures, and they didn't have sufficient vapor control. And what happened was they started having paint peeling off of clapboards. And the fix was to put these little plastic wedges. I don't know, you guys, I'm sharing my screen, but I don't know if you can see that. It's got a little plastic wedge in the top of this clapboard. And what that did was allow the uh, backside of the clapboard to dry, and it worked. And I was at another project, I don't know, a few months ago, and that clapboard was lying on the ground, and I asked the painter about who had pulled that off, and he said he did, and he told me that 20 years prior he had painted that house, and his name was Bill Link. And as a student of building science back then and a painter, he fixed this house's peeling paint problems, and it worked ever since. And I thought that was pretty darn cool. And it was neat to see something that I had heard about in the earliest days of my career in real life, and it had performed 20 some years later. That the house was dirty, but the paint film was still in good shape, and it was doing its job. Pretty cool. Here's one that's going to be disappointing to the designer folks in the crowd, I'm guessing. So flat, light colored exterior paint is going to look the best, the longest. And the simple reason for that is glossy paints lose their luster, and it's often not uniformly. So you end up with shiny sections of house and less shiny sections of house, even matte sections of house, and it looks bad. Dark colors fade more than light colors, or at least it's more perceptible. I believe that the reflective quality of light coatings makes them also last longer, like I've seen with asphalt shingled roofs too. But it is disappointing, and especially now that everything seems to be painted gray, I'll be curious what that's going to look like in 10 years. You can paint some things that you might surprise you: vinyl siding, aluminum siding. I've had a friend get a 10 years additional service out of his parents' aluminum siding just because they had little money to do anything else, and looked way better and held and stuck amazingly well. You can paint vinyl windows sometimes. You have to be careful. Dark colors make vinyl expand and contract more than it does already, so that's kind of a problem. I love pre-finished siding, cedar shingles, because it's done in a factory. The moisture content is presumably checked. If it fails, you have a warranty. It's someone else's problem, hopefully. Here's an interesting one. Backrolled sprayed surfaces. So if you spray paint onto a rough surface, clapboard, even a smooth surface, inevitably the direction of the spray is going to mean that there are potentially parts of the surface that are uncovered. And this was demonstrated to me by someone explaining that on bridges with riveted construction or bolted construction, someone has to paint with a brush the bolt heads or the rivets, because a sprayer will not coat the backside away from the spray head. So it makes sense to me you should back roll things that you spray just to make sure that all the surfaces are coated completely. And a personal failure of mine is to try and paint in late fall and have dew in the morning, compromise my nice new paint job. I've only painted with damage once, but it does make it a little nerve-wracking. I would tell you just wait until spring. Boy, this is so important, and you've heard me touch on it all night, but oh my God, people, follow the instructions. Paint experts tell you this, painters tell you this. Why they don't, I don't know. But, you know, I would say you used to have an excuse when you had to rely on the paint can, and inevitably it gets covered with paint. But you can get this stuff on your phone now. As an experiment before tonight's program, I searched my Ben Moore Fresh Start primer. I put in Fresh Start with the can, with the product number 046, and hit a Google search, and the PDF of the product data sheet comes up with links to customer service, and it couldn't be easier to get information from the people who really know if you're trying to. So it's something that I think it's Justin who has said to me in the past, if people followed the directions, it's arguable that fine home building would be out of business, but I don't see that happening soon. So there's an example. That's what that looks like. It tells you how much coverage you get. It's going to tell you what temperature you can apply it in. It's going to tell you what spray tip you need if you're spraying it. It's going to tell you how to thin it and how much you can thin it. I mean, really, it is literally all there in a page or two. And to their credit, the manufacturers make it pretty easy to figure out. And this kind of document is consistent for all paint and coatings that I am familiar with. So, woo, you're up, Justin.
Great.
Nicely
just
done,
one quick
sir.
question for you, Patrick, first is regarding chemistry. Just paint dries and it cures. What's the difference? And what's actually happening with the cure? Like, why do you have to worry about why is paint sensitive for like some days after you paint it? Things like that.
Oh, well, I would be, going outside my lane if I tried to get into the, the nuances, the chemistry, but the water, the carrying liquid, needs to evaporate, whether that's water or a solvent base, alkyd products that Justin's talking about are going to be thinned with mineral spirits. That stuff has to evaporate. And until it does, it's susceptible to rehydrating, dissolving. It's not the problem with oil-based products, obviously, but they seem to get watermarks and other discolorations resulting from getting wet from dew or rain.
So just like a real quick background here. I spent, as Mike said, I spent a lot of years in fine home building, green building advisor. What we do now is historic restoration work. We've chosen to focus on old buildings because I like the idea of maintainability and sustainability. And that to me, and craftsmanship, and that feels like the nice intersection. A lot of what we do is windows, but we do a lot of reproduction carpentry, a lot of doors, a lot of architectural elements. And what we're going to talk about today is linseed oil paint. And I wrote an article about this for Green Building Advisor and also in Fine Home Building. I've been using it for years now. We use it on most of our projects, but I really can't claim that I am an expert in this topic. So I will not be hesitant to tell you that I don't know the answer to a question. Part of what we're going to talk about at the end today is that more people need to use this so that we get more experience and more questions. That's going to be crucial for kind of this reintroduction of linseed oil paint. So, but without that, I mean, that setting aside, let's just kind of dive in here. So at its heart, linseed oil paint is flax seeds that have been crushed to create an oil. That oil is mixed with pigments, and you get a paint. Paint, by definition, is a carrier and a pigment. You can make it from a lot of things. In this case, traditional linseed oil paint has a thousands of year history. It's very simple, and a lot of the products you can buy today, the kind of these recreated linseed oil paints are just as simple as these originals. So when you see here on the left is just kind of a little diagram of oil plus pigment equals linseed paint. On the right, and this isn't a truly fair comparison because if you look closely at the screen, you'll see that can of Kills is actually interior primer. But what I'm trying to show you here is two unopened cans. The can on the left is a modern alkyd paint, and the can on the right is the same size can of linseed paint, traditional linseed paint. And you can see the difference in weight. 3.4 pounds for the alkyd, 4.6 for the linseed oil paint. And the point here is that with linseed oil paint, everything that's in the can is going into the wood. There's nothing that evaporates off. You're opening the can, you're applying it, and there is no solvent to dissipate, okay? And that's going to be an important thing to remember as we move forward here. I'm going to try and be as quick as I can with this kind of linseed oil primer, so we have lots of time for questions. But I couldn't resist diving into like a little bit. I had way too much fun looking for old advertisements for paint. I was like, I went down a rabbit hole and it was so good. So back in the, I mean, this goes back thousands of years with linseed oil paint, but let's talk about kind of modern paint of this last, 100, 120 years. So in the 1910s, it was kind of, that back in those days, it was very common for a can of paint to brag about the fact that it had pure linseed oil in it. That was premium, right? So what you see here is a can of Benjamin Moore, I guess back when it was just Moore, in 1910. This one is my absolute favorite. In the 1920s, they literally are so proud of putting lead in paint that this is a book, a children's book, where the Dutch boy is riding a bar of lead. And, so that's kind of gives you an idea of where they're at in the 1920s with kind of selling this dream of durability, right? By the 1930s, and we're going to dive a little bit into this, it's a little bit more talk about investing in your house, right? The thrust of a lot of advertisements became increase the value of your home by using the best paint. By the 1940s, and this is kind of where it gets interesting. You can see again the advertisement of both lead, but also with pure linseed oil. And I'm going to kind of delineate this with. It's good to think about this as pre-World War II and post-World War II, because right in the middle of the 40s is when it starts to change. You start to not have access to the same, because of rationing and because of the war production effort, you start to not have access to the same raw materials. So product formulations start to change a little bit to make do. On top of that, post-war, you have this post-war building boom. You have this DIY movement. And so advertisements and paint products start to shift towards easier cleanup, faster dry times. You don't have to be a professional to make this look good. And that was kind of what's represented here in the 1950s. By the 60s, we're full-fledged, latex house paint is the future. Everything plastic all the time. Even Dutch boy, the all lead all the time is kind of all in on latex house paints. By the 70s, we've known about lead paint and the poisoning that occurs from lead since beginning of the 1900s. If you could go back, there's plenty of documentation. Everybody knew about it. It was a problem, but it wasn't until the late 70s that they really said enough is enough. We're cutting it out. So, and I'm going to kind of just fast forward from that's kind of where modern paint comes in, right? Like kind of post 1978, early 80s up to today. And what you had was, I'm just going to zoom in on this one here because there's a quote in here that I think is so interesting, and it's figure on painting your house. The price will depend on what you used last time. Dutch boy doesn't crack and scale. It resists the weather, wears down stubbornly by gradual chalking, which leaves a smooth, unbroken surface. It's an ideal foundation for repainting. So we knew about this back in the 30s, which is when this ad is from, that when the base of a paint is linseed oil, it will not peel, it will not peel, crack, or otherwise need to be scraped off of a building. What it does is it naturally chalks as it kind of dries out, for lack of a better scientific term, and it needs to be maintained. So how does this differ from modern paints? Well, with modern paints, the strategy for success is encapsulation. And like Patrick talked about, and this is not to nag on Patrick, this is the widespread messaging is coat all 6 sides. You need to wrap that sucker, because our only hope here is that you seal this thing so completely in plastic that there's no chance that any moisture is going to get in. But the problem is that if moisture does get in, and it will, because of the ways that these modern paints, they age, they tend to crack, they tend to have little gaps and openings. The wood moves, so you get joinery that opens up and allows some moisture to get in. Once it gets in, it can't get back out easily. So this kind of methodology, this approach to how we're going to make this latex paint work is to seal the hell out of it and then hope water doesn't get in. But when water does get in, we can't get it back out again. So what happens is the paint bubbles, it peels. This photo on the right is one I took from a job site last year where we were doing some work. Sometimes all that's left is the paint. And it's just like paint in the, I mean, we've probably all seen it on old houses. It's paint in the shape of the wood that used to be behind it. So the paint becomes kind of what's left, right? So linseed oil paint is a little different. You'll see on the photo on the right, like I showed you before, it's really just boiled linseed oil and pigment. And that's just kind of demonstrating that those are the only real ingredients, or the primary ingredients. The photos up top here, we're showing 3 different samples of wood. I believe this is Doug fir. On the left, you see the surface of the wood has been treated with raw linseed oil. On the middle sample, it's been treated with linseed oil paint, which is pigment plus boiled linseed oil. And the sample on the right is a modern acrylic paint. So you can see the difference in the way that the oil penetrates into the wood. And that's also backed up by that photo center below, which in the left-hand side of the photo, you can see linseed oil paint next to the green acrylic paint that was being scraped off and replaced with linseed oil paint. So what we're trying to kind of drive home here is that rather than surface protection, linseed oil paint is designed to penetrate into the wood. This is important, A, because oil and water don't like each other. So the oil by nature is going to repel water. But second of all, the oil, because of the molecular structure of it, it is able to penetrate deeper into the wood than the water is going to penetrate. Raw linseed oil, which is basically it's never been heat treated, is a little thinner in consistency. It can soak deeper into wood than boiled linseed oil. However, raw linseed oil isn't as good of a carrier for linseed oil paint as boiled linseed oil. So what we do, and we'll talk about this more, is the first coat gets raw oil mixed in, and then the second and the subsequent coats are just straight out of the can. This photo on the right is just kind of a toss in here to also give credit to the fact that linseed oil paint sticks to just about anything. We talk a lot about, it penetrates wood and it soaks in, and that's how it protects. But even as just a straight surface coating, it's pretty fantastic paint. Shown here on some metal. We use it a lot for hardware. And again, I'm moving through this quickly, so there's going to be plenty of time for discussion after. I know I'm going fast, but let's talk real quick about how to apply it. It's a 3-coat system, just like modern paints are. It's a primer and 2 top coats. The difference is it's all the same product. So you buy 1 can. For the first coat, you're going to thin it roughly 50-50 paint and raw linseed oil. If you want it to dry faster, which is going to be most of the time, it's going to be pretty important because raw linseed oil dries very, very, very slowly. So we typically add a splash of turpentine. We'll call it 15%. These are not exact numbers. You can play with this. Generally, you want the paint to soak in. It's not about coverage on that first coat. The primer coat is not blocking the surface. It's penetrating the surface for protection. So think about it. It's going to be important to think about it like that when you use this. But generally speaking, 50% paint, up to 50% raw linseed oil, a splash of turpentine, mix it really, really, really well, and then apply it very thin. Thin coats. Up in the right-hand corner there, you see a sample board showing 3 coats. All the way on the left is the first coat of green. This is bronze paint, I believe, in this picture. This is their Amsterdam green, lovely color. It soaks in. The second coat is a little bit more of a surface, but it's usually blotchy. And then the third coat gives it a nice glossy hard shell finish. Okay, so here's where I think we go wrong with modern paints, is that we have this idea, and I have this complaint about a lot of products, but we're going to talk about paint today, is this myth of zero maintenance. Like, you can't. It either can be maintained or you have to throw it away at the end. I don't buy a new work truck and weld the hood shut. You know, I know that I have to do things to that vehicle. I know that I have to change the oil and change the tires and change filters and fluids and, you know, put air in. I know that there's work involved in making that thing function. Yet acrylic paint, the only thing you can do to maintain it is to put another coat on. There is no other way to extend the life of acrylic paint other than to add another coat. And when you eventually add too many coats, or you have some other problems, the only method is to strip it completely off and start over again, or strip it far enough back that you're getting good adhesion again for the next cycle of acrylic paint. Linseed oil paint makes no promises of zero maintenance. In fact, kind of the mantra is linseed oil paint requires maintenance, but it can be maintained. And that's kind of the difference, is it will last, you know, forever. You just have to take care of it. And what does take care of it mean? It means that after, and this is obviously just like modern paints, this is going to differ by the situation, the color, the exposure, the substrate, everything. Typically, around 3 to 5 years, the 3 to 5 year mark, what's going to happen is the paint's going to start to look more chalky. And what you do then is you can either apply another coat of warm boiled linseed oil to redo the surface. You could add another coat of paint, which is a particularly, that is the correct solution for when you're using whites, by the way, because adding a layer of oil over the top of a white coat of paint is going to tend to leave you with a little bit of a yellow surface. So just a heads up, if you're using white linseed oil paint, maintain it by adding a fresh coat of paint. What this does is it kind of reactivates, it replenishes the oil, and kind of resets the clock on the paint. And now you've got the next 3 to 5 years. It could be longer, and you continue this cycle. And what it does is it requires you to touch it. It gives you a chance to get up and close with things and see if there's problems, stop problems before they become bigger problems. And it embraces this mindset that this is not a hands-off thing. You're engaging with the product, and in exchange for that engagement, you're getting something that will never need to be scraped, will never need to be removed. It's on there, you're done painting with that. So this is kind of my too long didn't read version of the thing. Compared to modern acrylic paints, linseed oil paint protects it beyond the surface. So it, rather than just trying to coat the surface like the shell of an M&M, it's actually penetrating in and it's protecting from the inside. This also opens possibilities in terms of species, which I think is very important, because there's an increasing chatter among builders who say, like, oh yeah, if you want that to last, you got to use mahogany, or you can't use eastern white pine, that's junk, it'll rot out in 2 years. We use primarily eastern white pine. We use Douglas fir for windows and doors. These are kind of the woods that everyone has gone, you can't use those anymore. They're crap, right? But if they're painted with the right paints, they work just fine. And that, I think, is an important thing when we're in this position of importing wood that's been treated with, you know, vinegar in order to make it resistant. And I know that's changing. I know there's a U.S. plant that's either coming online or it's already come online. But we're importing, you know, the mahogany that we sometimes use in our shop, we're getting from the Congo. So, I mean, I would much rather get eastern white pine here in New England than mahogany from the Congo. Anyway, point number 2, it doesn't trap moisture. So if water gets into or behind the wood, it can wick to the surface to dry. Careful here, it's not breathable. That's really the wrong term to use. Really wicking is the way to think about this. And I don't know if I can really defend that amongst a bunch of building scientists who are probably going to rip me to shreds with absorption and adsorption and permeability and all that, but I'll let you guys duke that out. The way to kind of think about this, the way the linseed paint companies like to talk about it is like Gore-Tex. is like it, it primarily it keeps water out, but if you do get water behind it, it will allow it to dissipate back out again. Because of that, because no surface film means no scraping. It can easily be maintained by either adding a fresh coat of oil or another coat of linseed oil paint. And the safety is one thing we haven't talked about here yet. There's no petrochemicals in linseed oil paint, or very little, depending on which brand you get. It's very low or zero VOC, and there's no microplastics. And that's going to be a huge consideration for obviously the green end of things. But all of that being said, all those beautiful things that we love about linseed paint, there are some serious hurdles to overcome here. And I try my best to be I love linseed oil paint, but I try my best to be very honest about hurdles, because there are definite hurdles. One is the mold problem. Linseed oil is an organic substance. So in the early 2000s, I forget, it was 2007, somewhere around there, linseed oil paint kind of poked its head into the US market. The brand was All Back. A lot of people tried it, and a lot of people had major mold bloom when they used it. So the reaction was kind of very typical of the building industry. They went, well, it can never be done. We can't ever do it. It's all going to turn to mold. But what then quickly became apparent is that All Back does not include any natural mildewcides in their formulation. Whereas every other manufacturer of linseed paint includes either titanium dioxide or zinc oxide, or a combination of both, which are mold preventatives. This isn't to say that you will never have mold with linseed oil paint, but I think it's fair to say that the situations where you might have mold with it are going to come down to you didn't do something right, or you just have a situation where mold is going to take hold in no matter what your surface coating is, environmental conditions. The second thing to think about here is availability and quality of options. There just are not a lot of companies making linseed oil paint, and many of them are from overseas. So you're not going to be able to pop down to the store as easily and get a fresh can of paint to finish your project. That's going to be a hurdle. Color options. I was talking to the owner of Brones, and which is one of the linseed oil paint companies. And he kind of jokes, I forget how many colors they have, but he jokes that, he finds it funny that Benjamin Moore is constantly adding new historic colors to their list of colors. And he's kind of like, there's only so many historic colors that there are. We can't keep adding new ones. This is historical, we're not discovering new historical colors. We know what the colors are. We know what the formulations were. And his company in particular prides themselves on only having historically accurate colors. But I guess what I'm trying to say here is we don't have thousands of color options like you do with Benjamin Moore, Sherwin-Williams. You have kind of a limited palette, and a lot of these companies take the approach of telling you how to mix their paints with white. Buy a can of blue and mix it in this ratio to white to get these shades of blue. So it's a little bit old school in that sense, which I think is a hurdle. Not necessarily a bad one. I like less choices, but Carol might have a problem with it. There's going to be some pricing complaints. People tend to look at the price of a quart of linseed oil and say, $55, $70, that's way too much. I could buy a gallon of paint for that. You have to look at the coverage. The coverage of a quart of paint can usually rival a gallon of modern paint. I think one of the biggest things we're going to have is a problem with resistance of application technique, both in how it's applied, but then also, the equipment used to apply it, but also the methodology. And by that, I mean, it needs to be put on in very thin coats. If you put it on in thick coats, it takes forever to dry. It can tend to wrinkle, and you have some kind of other problems that you'd expect with any natural oil finish, tung oil or anything like that. It needs to be thin. Typically, it's applied with a brush. A roller is also fine as long as you back brush it. we have only sprayed it one time and just didn't really like it. Theoretically, you can spray this. There's no reason not to. It's flammable, just like it's got oil in it. You have to backbrush it even after you spray it. I don't see a huge future in spraying linseed oil paint, but I suppose I could eat my words on that. And I skipped a point here. For optimal results, you really have to start with bare wood. If you want the benefits of never having to scrape the stuff off again, you have to get the old coatings that are going to require scraping scraped and gone. Like I said earlier, you have to really understand and make clients understand and embrace that maintenance cycle. This is not a, paint it and forget it. Although I was really surprised to look in research for the article that I wrote to look at, what is Benjamin Moore, a premium or other premium paint companies really saying in terms of their durability, their longevity. And I think it was something like 5 to 7 years is what they were saying before you needed to have your house repainted again. And I thought, like, wow, that's not that impressive. I mean, like, so you're almost going to have to touch it anyway. You might as well touch it with something that's not going to eventually have to come off. And I alluded to this earlier, but group learning, I think, is going to be the most important thing here. I talk about this with anybody who will try linseed oil paint. The more people that use it, the more knowledge we're going to have. It's like scientific peer review. I need to know, that what works for me here in New England might not work for somebody in Arizona. What do you do in Arizona to make it work for you? What's the difference between using light colors and dark colors? What about when I'm doing it in the winter? What about after it's just rained? What about when there's an urban environment where there's a lot of surface contamination, from passing traffic and things like that? These are all the things that, and not only that, but the pressure of competing products pushing each other and kind of settling out into stratifying it to premium products, middle of the road products, economy products, and what are the differences in those? We all need to be using some of these things so we can start to figure this out. And then just, kind of closing thoughts here. This is just a couple of projects. The most recent linseed oil paint projects that we finished up. The one on the left is using Odison, which is a brand of linseed oil paint, and the one on the right is Brones. I have some sources of the companies over there. It's worth noting that Heron is one of the paint companies listed there, is the only linseed oil paint company in the United States. They're in California. Super knowledgeable guy running that company. They're worth a look. Allback, like I said, has been around for a long time, but they're the only ones that require the addition of a mildew side. It doesn't come from the factory. Brones is super premium, high priced, high value customer service, really, really premium product. And Odison and Viking, I think, are just kind of good, durable, middle of the road choices. So that's kind of, and there's my email address down below. I encourage anybody to give me, shoot me a message. I'm happy to talk shop with anybody who wants to get into the nerdy nitty gritty about this stuff.
Awesome. Thank you both. That was it was really interesting from totally different perspectives on both of it. And there are lots of questions. And if you're both open to it, we may go a little past our 7 o'clock deadline. Yeah. If you gotta roll out, we totally understand. Same for the people in the audience. And I don't know if it makes more sense to go backwards and ask the linseed questions because you were just talking about that, or if it makes sense to go back to some of the questions that are probably applicable, maybe to both of you. Maybe we'll start there, which is, what do you do? Like, how do you know when you need to dispose of it? And this is probably different for both of you guys, right? Like, does linseed oil get rancid? And Patrick, when do you know when you need to get rid of like your standard latex paints? Like, are there obvious things where you should just kind of ditch that paint? And then how do you dispose of both of them?
Linseed oil paint, if it's in a sealed container, will be fine.
It does not get rancid. Okay.
No, it's not purified linseed oil is degummed and all the mucilage is removed from it. So it's got a much lower risk of harboring organic nasty stuff like mold and mildew and stuff like that. Well, just kind of, and I'll let Patrick answer, but just that reminded me that I didn't mention that linseed oil that we're talking about here is not the linseed oil you're buying at the hardware store. Boiled linseed oil off the shelf at a home center has never actually been treated in that boiled manner. What they do is they add chemicals to basically alter the crushed flaxseed. It's a petroleum version of boiled linseed oil. So just be careful when you're buying that. Same thing goes for turpentine off the shelf at the store. You want to be buying, purified boiled linseed oil and raw linseed oil, and you want to buy gum turpentine. Those are kind of, or balsam turpentine. Those are going to keep things, garbage in, garbage out is kind of the point there. But yes, in terms of longevity, as far as I know, there's no problem storing linseed oil paint.
Folks I've talked to, acrylic latex paint, if it looks okay and doesn't have mold on it, it's probably okay, up to probably 5 or 6 years. That's assuming it was put away clean, right? It didn't have stuff in the can, because that's going to go nasty. And I would say throw it out if you have any doubts about it, and you don't need to, don't put it down the drain, don't put it on the ground. You should mix kitty litter into your acrylic latex paint and throw it in the trash. Alkyd paints, oil-based paints need to go to a hazardous waste collection site in Connecticut. They do it a few times a year in different communities, and I take my stuff, save it up, and they dispose of it. Connecticut has, Justin might know about this too, a fee on every can of paint you buy, every gallon of paint, and they're supposed to take your paint from old paint from you as part of that fee that they're collecting when you buy new paint. So it shouldn't be hard to get rid of. Yeah.
Oh, paint care, I think it's called, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think they're supposed to take your paint. If you're just walking in off the street at your Sherwin-Williams store, they might ask you some questions, but I think that's part of the deal.
Yep. And, it's the same thing for if we want to get rid of a can of linseed oil paint. We either let it just kind of dry out, or we mix kitty litter into it. Same deal. There is an added hazard of any true oil-based product is that oily rags can combust. So we have one of those fire-resistant cans that keeps oxygen from getting into it. So we have rags, we throw them in there after we're done working with them. If we're on a job site, we just basically have an oversized Ziploc bag with water in it, and everything gets thrown into that. And as long as it's got a little bit of water in it, you can just throw it away as normal, and there's no risk of fire there.
The way I usually find that paint is bad is that when I open it, it's all rusty and all the rust falls into the paint. And then I decide that it's no longer good unless I strain it, but I don't have a strainer anymore. So then it just goes away.
I was going to say, it's not the expensive part of painting. Throw out the paint and buy new paint. If it's silly, it's false economy to try and use stuff that's going to likely be a problem.
Right, exactly. And just a point of clarification, alkyd is oil. And the one I wanted to get to, come back to that, Justin. The way I understand it is acrylic latex. There's actually no more latex. Latex is the natural rubber. Yeah, there's no more latex in it. So it's actually always acrylic. There's no such thing as latex paint anymore, as far as I know. Is that correct, as far as you guys know?
I always hedge my bets with everything I say and say that for the most part,
yes,
you're not going to find any latex. It's not acrylic paint, and it's not water-based while we're talking about it. There's no water in it. So that's kind of a misnomer. Number two, I should have mentioned alkyd versus oil paints. When the linseed oil formulations in paint in the 30s to 40s in World War II, as linseed oil content went down, it was replaced with synthetic alkyds. which people are still calling oil-based paint, but it's not oil. It's a synthetic resin, I guess. So it's important to make that distinction. So it's acrylics versus alkyds now. It's no longer oil versus latex.
Hmm.
And we in the fine home building world, we're nerds about getting the words right, Patrick? Terminology is everything.
Right.
It's important.
Yep.
And I think Justin told all of you that there's no such thing as zero maintenance. I feel like that's a building science covenant too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There were a few questions about permeability of the paint and the different paints. One fact I learned recently that really shocked me, maybe from Patrick's article, but I'm not sure, was shellac primer, such as like your average bin or Kills or those kind of stain blockers, are 100% vapor impermeable. If you paint your wall with that, it's like putting up a sheet of plastic.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, which makes me think of some jobs I've done where we used a lot of that to make up for like naughty materials or something. And now I worry, like,
Yeah.
okay, what's going on inside that vapor sandwich?
Patrick, I think that's your next article for Fine Home Building is on how vapor impermeable that is, and wallpaper, because wallpaper is back and popular again. And so sounds like people are putting a lot of vapor barriers on the inside of their homes, and or on the outside or on the wrong side, and nothing, it's all has to do with language, which is so important. Back to the permeability though, of the rest of, like, Justin, you talked about it a little bit with linseed oil. And there was a question specifically. This one was about linseed oil, but I think it's worthwhile. And both of you feel free to answer. I don't know, because the question is in hot and humid climates, right? Like, how is this different in, potentially different climate zones? Like, what's the knowledge that they need to paint with different paints in hot and humid climates versus like what we would traditionally see in the Northeast, where unfortunately for anybody in the audience, we all are.
Patrick?
I was going to say, ask local painters, right? Like, asking us is probably, we're going to have our regional biases. That's what I would say. And there are products made for both cold and warm temperatures by major paint manufacturers. I don't know what they do to them to make them more cold stable, or workable in hot temperatures, but that is consideration. I know it's a bad idea to paint in direct sunlight no matter what you're doing. I'm guessing Justin's product similarly, it's not ideal to be in direct sun, and you can plan your work to be out of the sun during the day if you think about it a little bit. Is that are temperatures a consideration for those products that you?
No, I mean, it has the same general rules of kind of seasonality. At least, I mean, let's say for New England, your painting season is roughly the same. It's not that it won't dry in the winter. You can apply it when it's cold. It's just that it takes longer.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, we're kind of right now, this time of year, we still have some projects where we have linseed oil paint going on, and but we're running out of road. It's going to be to the point where it's not efficient to be painting outside because of how long it takes in between coats. There is nothing to say that you can't use this paint anywhere. But like I said, I think there's certain climates that are just riskier no matter what your coating is. So, does it need like a nuclear blast of mildewcides mixed into whatever you use in order to really counter that? I don't know. And I think that's why we need more people using it. I know it's in the historical context, the kind of the circles that I go in, it's not as big of an ask because people that have old houses typically like having an old house. Otherwise they would be done with it. So our customers typically are into this nerdy stuff. They understand the maintenance cycle. They understand the pain of having to pay to have paint removed. So it's not a hard sell in my line of work. But I understand that, if you're building a brand new house for somebody, you say, hey, why don't we do linseed oil paint on it? First of all, the painter's going to go, what? And then second of all, the client's going to go, what? And then 5 years later, you might go, why did I do that? Because now I got nothing but problems, right? The scale of it is important. How about this? Let's say if somebody in Arizona is willing to just buy a liter of this and do some sample boards and stick it in your backyard, that is enough for me to go, let's just find out what happens in different climates. What's your experience? Let's at least get it into the conversation so we can learn from it and start to address some of these, because alkyds are whether you like it or not, we're running out of road with alkyds. They're changing the formulations to meet these VOC regulations. They're kind of gutting the performance of the alkyds to make them skirt the laws, if you can even get them at all. I know contractors here in Connecticut that drive to Massachusetts to buy oil-based paint because they just can't let it go, or alkyd paint because they just they can't bear to switch. So those are kind of going away, and we're going to be left with acrylic paints. And there's a huge microplastic problem. There's a huge environmental concerns that go with it. They're not as kind of chemically safe as everyone likes to believe. There's a lot of nasty stuff in those things. So having this kind of natural, really, really long, durable, time-tested alternative is going to be important. And I think we need to all kind of play around with it and get to know it a little bit, because it's not going away. I don't think it's just going to grow in popularity. Even in the last 3 years, 4 years, I've seen it grow very, very much in terms of knowledge, and interest, from kind of, you weirdos who use linseed oil paint, to like, oh yeah, my client's been asking about that. I should probably try it so I know a little bit about it when they ask.
It's still unusual, Justin. I think you'd agree.
Very.
Yeah.
Very. It's like, this much of the market. It's like, it's nothing compared to modern paint. But I should say, modern paints have so much going for them. They're affordable, they're widely available, they're super flexible, they're fast drying, they're easy to clean up. There's a ton of stuff to love about them. But in terms of maintenance, I just think that they have a huge Achilles heel. They just aren't designed to elegantly fail and be renewed.
In addition to that, Patrick was talking earlier about like pre-primed products, right? And the painting or whatever, because you've worked with the linseed oil. If somebody picked it up, and decided to try it, do you see any downsides to having it like either pre-primed, maybe that first coat of linseed oil is on before it gets to your job site, and then you paint it twice, right, to cut down on time, or even just pre-painted ahead of time?
No, I don't think so. Well, it depends, I guess. So linseed oil paint will stick to just about anything. So you could put it over a traditional primer. You're not going to get the benefits of having all coats be linseed oil. On the flip side, all of our projects get a first coat of linseed oil paint, whether the client wants it or not. We insist on that first coat being linseed oil paint, even if the top coats are going to be acrylic, because we believe that it kind of feeds the wood and protects it. So those are kind of the opposite ends of that spectrum of choices. Does that answer your question, or are you asking something different?
Well, I was just thinking, like, you were talking about it's kind of niche right now, and, but if somebody would pick it up, like a lot of the other products that come already pre-primed or pre-painted, right? Is there any downside to that? Because I don't know, Patrick, if you can talk a little bit about, you talked about the primer, and it's always whatever the cheapest thing is, and it needs to be painted, relatively quickly, but also just, in our experience, we often will paint stuff that's pre-painted when we put it up just as like a final seal-in coat once it gets put up to protect it because it can get damaged. And I'm just wondering if linseed oil, if somebody decided to pick it up, like say the LP Smart Side decided to pick it up and they did, maybe that's not a good one because it's not raw wood, but it's like a composite, but you know what I'm saying? Is there any downsides to that? It was making it maybe like more marketable, right? Time seems to be the biggest factor, right? Takes a long time. So
yeah, well, we typically figure on 24 hours between coats. So it's really not different than, 30 years ago using alkyd-based paint when they, for interior work, it was a lot more common to use it for baseboards and, kind of these high wear areas. So kind of old school painters are going to be familiar with that longer dry time. I think it's going to be a hard shift to go from, a 2-hour dry time to 24 hours. But it's not, it hasn't really hurt us. You can't go on site and do 3 coats in a day, but it's not, it hasn't been as bad. That's the first thing that everybody always complains about is the dry times. No way I can do it. It would kill me productivity wise. I never make any money, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think it's as big of a hurdle as people are afraid of. So if somebody, like you're saying, Emily, picked it up and wanted to do it, I don't think the dry time would be a huge issue. I think it's feasible. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if I see anybody doing it unless the education, unless the clients, the public was asking for it. And right now we're kind of in this mindset of when wood fails, we blame everything else but the paint. It's, well, you didn't use the right species of wood. You got to use mahogany or teak or something like that. You didn't back ventilate it. You didn't, you didn't do your joinery right. You didn't, whatever it is. If no one ever for some reason goes, maybe the paint's the problem,
Good point.
By the way, I still do think vented rain screens are good, just for the record.
I was gonna ask that, but I was like, oh man, we're gonna talk about this. Is there a reason not to do them anymore?
No, but they solve problems beyond just paint adhesion, obviously. But I will say that we don't this kind of mentality of priming end grain and back priming stuff that's about to be installed. That's all modern paint stuff. That wasn't really a thing because it didn't need to be a thing. The encapsulate 6 sides is a modern paint. It's a modern paint solution.
Well, it's also, I think the stock that we're forced to use in the in the normal mainstream, it's plantation grown. It's not the lumber that we were using 100 years ago or 200 years ago. So that's a challenge too.
Yep.
There was a question like, I don't know, an hour ago that said, I thought latex paint was vapor open, which is why it is a class 3 vapor retarder in the IRC. Is indoor latex paint and outdoor latex paint different?
To my knowledge, there's additional stuff in exterior paint, but the basic acrylic whatever it is, the basis of the paint is largely the same. There's mildewcides and other additives in exterior paint that's not in interior paint because interior paint just doesn't need as much weatherability and resistance to, UV and other things that are out, bugs, mildew, algae.
Yeah. What I've read about that is that latex paint is actually highly variable and it's like tested at like a specific mill thickness. But how you apply it matters. Like, is it thin or thick? Is it multiple coats?
You mean it's vapor permeability, Michael?
Yes, it can vary a lot. That's what I've heard. So like instead of like the typical thing is it's between 5 and 8 perms. It's like if applied perfectly according to the test methods in a single coat or something, or 2 coats or whatever it's tested for, then yes. But if if it's applied hotter or colder, if it's thinned or things like that, additional coats, it changes the
Right.
property.
So I think to Mike's point, it's going to become more and more risky the more coats of paint you have on it, right? I mean, so when the only option is to add more coats of paint or rip it off and start over the years, you're just reducing your drying potential every coat you add.
And since I went all the way back to the questions that were like from early in the 6 o'clock hour, there also was another question. And Patrick, you said you like Benjamin Moore, so maybe you'll know this, which is Benjamin Moore. Is it Aura? Aurora. Isn't that extra fade resistance for darker exterior colors, in particular if it's matte? And so
like I said, matte finishes, low gloss finishes are going to look better longer than high gloss finishes. As far as dark colors, all I can tell you is that they test dark colors at the paint lab because they fade more than light colors. So, I mean, maybe it's going to last longer than other paint products, but I bet if you had Aura White and Aura Dark Navy Blue or Dark Gray, I'm going to put my money that the gray is going to look faded before the white one.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Is it similar for linseed, Justin? Just thinking like it powders out, right? So it has kind of a powdered finish. So it does that more like it dulls instead of like necessarily really fades.
Yeah, there's I talked to another preservationist who he theorizes that this idea that old houses should have, you should get flat paint when you paint a historic house because it just looks like that's what it's supposed to be. And it's like, I wonder if it looks like that's what it's supposed to be because that's what linseed oil paint would look like as it kind of dulls out. We kind of have that in our head. Something to point out while we're talking about that though is, and I didn't mention this for the maintenance thing. So let's say you get to the 5-year mark and it's kind of chalky looking and it's time to renew it. If you don't renew it, you're still getting the protection from it. It's still, the wood is still has oil in it. It's still working. Sometimes yes, you do want to replenish it at some point, but often it becomes a cosmetic thing. And that's going to be important consideration. I probably should put that on the hurdles thing. The hurdle slide is that there's not really sheen options. It's glossy when you put it on, if you do it well, and then it kind of fades to a matte finish, and that's what it is. And then you put more on and it goes back to glossy again. There's not really a way to dull it down that I know of. Which, that has not been a problem for us except for on one job, that black entry porch we just did that I showed you a picture of on that last slide. They were kind of like, this is a little bit out of vibe with the rest of the building here. I'm like, yeah, well, it'll dull. Just give it some time. See ya.
It'll stop being shiny soon.
Yeah.
Oh man.
With linseed oil, any particular type of caulking? Is it flexible? Will it cover things like big stretch, or does it have to be like a specific caulking?
I don't know the answer to that. I know it will stick. I don't have any issues with that. I don't know if you put it to a stretch test, what the kind of the elongation of it, like where are the limits to that? That's a great question. I don't know the answer to. A lot of times we're using more traditional filling methods. In certain cases, we're using linseed putty in conjunction with linseed paint. So they're very compatible in terms of expansion and contraction. But the big stretch would be an awesome experiment to run. And I think I'll do that, and we'll check it out and see what happens.
I was sure you were going to say, oh, we don't need caulk.
Yeah.
Well, Justin,
You're gonna let the water out. What do you need caulk for?
I mean, we use oakum and putty, but if you guys want to use Big Stretch, I guess that's fine.
Traditionalist. One last relevant question, I think, is can or would you apply linseed oil paint on interiors? Is there any difference in the longevity and maintenance of linseed oil paints versus on the exterior versus the interior?
I know that some companies, I know Brown's in particular, offers an exterior range of paint and an interior range. I don't know what the difference between them is. In other words, I don't know why they separate them out. I don't think there's any issue with necessarily using an exterior linseed paint inside. I'm sure the durability would be greatly increased. The stuff is super, super hard wearing. I mean, you could put it on like a porch floor and it is extremely durable. So I would think it would be an awesome choice for interior stuff. Just typically our line of work is exterior work, so we don't have a lot of call for doing it on the inside.
Or VOCs are probably pretty high.
For linseed oil paint?
Yeah. No.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. So this is where you get into definitions. Technically, yes, it has VOCs, but they're not. I don't know how you. Yeah, I think it smells fantastic. I mean, like I can't stand the smell of alkyd paint. I don't want to be anywhere near alkyd paint. And when you open up a can of linseed paint, it just smells great. It smells like natural oils, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that some people aren't sensitive to it. You might be, some people might be highly, we have in the green building crowd, obviously there's a big indoor air quality focus. And for some people that stems from being highly sensitive to certain things. And you might be highly sensitive to linseed oil. I don't know.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
It does not smell like a double IPA, Richard. Double IPAs are the alkyds of the beer world. Okay? Single IPAs are where it's at. John asked, sorry to hijack, but John asked what brand and product we settled on. We had a little bit of a problem recently with Odison. No matter how many coats of black we put on to this project, we couldn't get the sheen to even out. Brown's has recently set up U.S. distribution, and so that's become kind of our primary source, just because the customer support is awesome. They will hop on the phone and address issues with you, and the products are super, super high quality. I also really like Heron Paint because they're U.S. They're a California company. It's a small shop, and they're sourcing it from super local California farms. So it's all kind of this small little niche company, and I really like that too. So they have cool colors too. They have some fun colors that the other companies don't have.
You might be onto something with less colors. Sometimes when you break out the Benjamin Moore box that my interior designer carries around, the thing's like a suitcase, and there are like I don't know, I can't even venture to guess. I would have said 5,000, but I'm probably way off. Colors in this stupid thing. And, generally as a rule of thumb as designers, we don't give our clients more than like 3 to 5 choices. Because if you have more than 3, like there are probably 1,000 colors of white in there.
Yeah,
which is...
I'm telling you, point them to the Brown. I point clients to the Brown's website, and I just say, pick whichever one you want. They're all good, and they're all gonna look good. I don't care. They're all gonna be appropriate for an old house, and they all are nice colors.
Something that people don't think about, and it's kind of unrelated, but you got to look at paint in different lights. And I can't stress how important that is, because it's going to look different times of day, and where you're going to be in that space, respective to the hour, you should be picking a paint that looks good and the time you plan to be spending there.
That is a huge point. I think that's a great way to kind of wrap up our session, because here it's like 7:26 or so. But We did that on one of our projects, and our client picked this beautiful green color, and in the east stairwell it was a beautiful green color, and they were like, okay, let's paint the bedroom the same color, and it was on the south wall, and it was the most pukey yellow color you could ever imagine. You would not have said these two colors were the same color in the same house. It was needless to say, we picked a different color for that room, but yeah, look at it in your house or at your building site on the side of the house that it's going to be painted on, and shaded a little bit if it's going to have an overhang, and see what color it really is on the exterior. But
and even then, it's a leap of faith.
Right. And don't pick red. Red's never a good choice.
What about barn red?
Oh, but barn red, well, maybe not with linseed oil, because there's probably only one option for red. And so that does it fade to pink or does it fade to orange? Because that's the question.
Nope, it stays nice and red.
Well, thank you both for coming on. This was great. Come back and talk about interior paints. There's so much more to go down this rabbit hole of paint and VOCs and what it sticks to and what it doesn't stick to, and where you should use it and what you should use and how you should prep and paint. So thank you both for sharing your knowledge tonight. It was awesome. Crowd was engaged, so
it was fun being here. Thank you all.
Yeah, I wouldn't have picked anybody to go toe to toe with besides Patrick on this. He is the most rational and traditional person I could think of in terms of representing modern paints.
What?
I'm sure he's thinking, linseed paint, why would I ever buy that?
It's funny you mentioned that, Justin, because, you know, in our work, at a point, there's little new, right? But when I saw your piece on GBA, I was blown away, because I was like, wow, that is something I have never heard of. And that is the great thing about our work, is there's always new stuff to learn.
And I know we're trying to wrap up. There's this closing quote, and I'm not going to give the quote, but it's from a technical bulletin, and they talk about how in the span of 60 years, linseed oil as a paint as a paint formulation was all but extinct from consumer consciousness. Like, it was all there ever was, and then from World War II to now, no one's ever heard of it. Like, it was completely gone away. It was like unprecedented, erase from the consumer memory. So it's interesting that it's starting to creep back in a little bit, you know.
History repeats itself, right? And I appreciate that you bring something to the table on something that's new and maybe we should be thinking about and considering. But we also still desperately need Patrick to tell everybody how to use and appropriately deal with the things that are probably readily available for the other 95% of the market. And we can't
1000%. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
We can't discredit that, even though, you know, some of us on the bleeding edge are like, please bring back these things that we used to love and want to use again. So,
you know, make the stuff work well. And that's what Patrick's advice is gonna get you.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you both so much. This was great.
All right. Nice to see y'all.
Bye, y'all.
Good to see you. Thanks.